Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beyond the Forecast. But we're going to go ahead and jump straight into it because this is sort of a special episode. We have our first actual guest on Beyond the Forecast, and not just any guest. We have Bill Bunting from the Storm Prediction Center that is joining us today. So, thank you so much, Bill, for joining in, and we're so excited to have you. Also, have Dan Scoff, our KNWA Chief Meteorologist, here and we're going to go into a very, very nice conversation. So thank you for being on here today.
My pleasure. Great to be with you both.
And yeah, so we have a lot that we want to talk about, especially since we know at the Storm Prediction Center, they've been talking, outlook changes that was announced January 30th on your X page. And conversation's been out there to say the least, especially amongst the general audience and broadcasters, because it is kind of a big deal. This is not something you see typically happening all the time with these major, major changes. But before we dive into it, just tell us who you are, what your role is at the Storm Prediction Center.
Sure. Well, I've been here 13 years. I'm currently the deputy director, so I fill in for the director when he's on travel or out of the office. A lot of my daily work is administration, budget, personnel, but what I really love doing is filling in on the operational desks and working as a forecaster. I've worked all the desks here, lead forecaster, issuing outlooks and watches, and mesoscale discussions, and my interest in weather goes back to when I was 9 years old. So, and it wasn't the paperwork; it was the dealing with the atmosphere and trying to stay one step ahead. So, this is a great place to work. I can tell you that.
Nice. And how long have you been at the Storm Prediction Center for?
13 years at the SPC, and I'm going on my 41st year in the National Weather Service. So I've been around a while.
You've encountered a few storms, that's for sure,
Seen a
and
few,
you've
absolutely. That's
lived
right.
through them. Is there one storm in particular that you remember as a childhood, in your childhood, that just really solidified you wanting to become a meteorologist?
Yes, there. In fact, there were three, and they were all hurricanes growing up on the East Coast. But then when I was 17, there was an HP supercell that affected the area where I grew up, Virginia Beach, Virginia area, that caused a number of significant impacts and unfortunately a number of deaths with boats out to sea. And I think it was the hurricanes, it was that one severe thunderstorm and a few snowstorms sprinkled in that made me realize this is why I'm here.
Hmm.
It's to go to school to understand how to forecast weather, to try to do all I can to be part of a team that helps keep people safe. And it's worked out beyond my wildest expectations to have had the career I've had and to be where I'm at now.
Yeah, yeah. And so,
And
there
now
was,
you're literally doing what you love, and at the same time, you're helping the community be aware of severe weather,
yes.
helping that communication. Tell us what the Storm Prediction Center does on a daily basis. For those that they may not know, we obviously try to educate them as much as we can about the Storm Prediction Center, the risks, but
Mhm.
just tell us kind of because it's not just storms; it's fire danger. You have all sorts of stuff that you do at SPC.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Our mission is to forecast severe thunderstorms and tornadoes out to 8 days in the future, and also to produce fire weather forecasts out to that same length into the future for the lower 48 states. We don't forecast for the overseas parts of the United States, at least yet. But our mission is to do that in a way that's accurate, timely, and really does all we can do to help keep people informed and safe. And it's a branch of the National Weather Service that's been around since the early 50s and has really seen some tremendous advancements in recent years with the increases in numerical modeling and lately artificial intelligence techniques. But we still rely heavily on expert meteorologists. And that's the part that I enjoy the most because while my job has changed, humans are still very much a part of the forecasting and communication process. And I don't see that changing anytime soon.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you. And so you're talking about advancements and moving forward because obviously technology is also ever changing. And so what do you guys are doing at the Storm Prediction Center to sort of combat that?
Well, we've been making incremental changes over the years, but this is a big one, and it's big because it enables us. We have known for some time that we have more information about what is likely to take place on a given day than we've been able to convey through our traditional forecast. There were just limitations because of the way the forecast process was designed. By making these changes, we'll be able to go deeper into the range of expected outcomes on a given day. How bad could today be? How strong could the tornadoes be? How large might the hail get? Will the winds, straight line winds, be capable of causing significant damage? And we can also predict events that might have low probabilities. As meteorologists, we all know there are days where we're just not sure if storms will form, and if so, how many. But if one does manage to develop and sustain itself, it could be the kind of thing where, we'll be talking about it for days afterwards. It was in the past difficult to convey how bad we think things could get in those situations. With these changes, we'll be able to convey what we refer to as low probability, high impact situations. But also, I think, just give everyone, whether you're an interested citizen or a decision maker with emergency services or other responsibilities, a better idea of just what's in store on a given day and how bad it might get. And in Northwest Arkansas, where you average at least 90 days a year, where Storm Prediction Center forecasts have you in some risk of severe weather, this is an important point.
Yeah, 2025 was really active. In fact, a lot of people really forgot that tornadoes can happen in Northwest Arkansas. A lot of people that move here, they have, the common notion that, hey, the mountains are going to protect us, the Ozarks, and tornadoes can't develop here. And then you have Easter Sunday, where we had, a QLCS tornado that came through. We had May 19th, which, the Tulsa Weather Service did their storm spotter training, and they talked about how literally almost 85-90% of our tornadoes are through QLCS tornadoes, at least in 2025, which is another challenge. And we'll talk more about that with, the conveying the threat level on those. But I would like to dive into, just so we can, we're talking about these new changes that are happening March 3rd. Tell us what is going to be new, and we'll bring up a graphic here from your page to let you know what you're talking about.
Sure. And I think to start, I should just say that the way it's been prior to March 3rd is that we would forecast the severe weather using 5 words that would describe the threat in an aggregate sense. And those words were marginal, slight, enhanced, moderate, and high risks. Underneath those 5 words were probabilities. And that's the probability of a tornado, large hail, or damaging wind event within about 25 miles of a point. And then the third thing that we would do is we would add an area, we called it a hatched area, where the threat for significant severe weather was 10% or greater. And by significant severe, I mean 2-inch or larger hail, 75 mile per hour winds or greater, or EF2 or greater tornadoes. And while that was useful information and very helpful, there were days where we knew that the weather could be much worse, and it was hard to convey that, say 3 to 4-inch diameter hail, or EF3, 4, or even 5 tornadoes. It was hard to convey that. With these new changes, we'll be able to convey more of those details about what's the reasonable worst case scenario that could happen today. And I think that's really useful information from my past experiences briefing emergency managers, elected officials, first responders in general. After you give them a forecast, they will often ask, well, what's the worst case scenario for today? How bad do you think it could get? These changes that we're going to make in early March will help folks to answer those questions. And I think it gives a more complete picture of the forecast.
I mean, that you can see right now, we're looking at that risk, and we're looking at this hatched area. And so, Aleshli, this is going to be something that we are going to have to convey to the public and explain. It's going to take some education. And that's essentially what we want to do.
Yeah, and so this kind of sparked up questions, I'm sure, for many people out there, but also we had questions of our own when it came to the intensity levels and sort of, you already spoke about the idea of how you guys came about creating this, but how long have you guys been in the process of working with this exact product? How long have you guys been implementing it behind the scenes? And then I also have some lead-on questions in terms of communication from outside of Storm Prediction Center, but let's go ahead and talk about how long have you guys been working on this product for?
Yeah, that's a good question. We've actually been working in-house to develop this capability. It's going on 5 years now. And we started doing it officially in December of 2021. In fact, it was the Mayfield Tornado Day that was one of the early days that we were trying this experimentally, just within SPC to see if we even had any skill. And so over the course of the intervening years, we have found out that in fact we do. We do have the ability to do this. Is it perfect? Not by a long shot. The atmosphere is very difficult to predict, especially rare events like tornadoes. But there is skill, and so by combining the environment and storm characteristics, mainly is it going to be supercells or squall line or some mix, you can actually say a lot more about what might happen on a given day than just through our traditional forecast. So as we developed skill, as we did the verification, and it showed that yes, we can do this, and we should be doing it, and we should be sharing it with everybody, we began to think of what it might look like. And I would say over the last 6 to 12 months, we've really done the background work to make sure that we can generate these forecasts internally. We can display them on our webpage and conduct the training so that folks that are pivotal parts of the warning system, such as yourselves, can get this information and make effective use so that you can do what you're experts in, and that is communicating this information to folks that view or listen to your forecast.
And, I was with that training that Evan did not too long ago, just yesterday, as a matter of fact. I was actually very surprised how good you were in predicting the strength of tornadoes with the area that you outlined with the significant. I love the way they said it was the probability of the maximum strength of the tornado, maximum intensity. I think you said the probability of the maximum intensity. And then you were talking about the less than SIG 1 and then SIG 2 level and then SIG 3. And one of the things that I kind of am going to struggle with is the graphical standpoint on how to display that, because with your graphics, you have the overlay, but it's a transparent background that really is opaque because it cuts out the other areas of intensity. And so when we put a texture on there, it's got to be transparent. But then Evan brought up a great point. Most events are probably going to be SIG 1, SIG 2. Very rarely, like typical high risks, maybe 1 or 2 a year, essentially, will probably have the SIG 3, and that's what you're reserving it for.
Yeah, you're exactly right. SIG 3 will be infrequent. There may be some years where we don't have any SIG 3 tornado forecast. If it's an active year, it could be on the order of 3 to 5. And so I think how you display it sort of depends on how you normally convey information. If you just show the categorical outlooks, today's a marginal risk or enhanced or whatever the case might be, then maybe our new forecasting approach just gives you additional information to share verbally with your audience. If you typically show tornado probabilities, which we've been producing those now for pretty close to a quarter century, if that's an important part of how you convey information, perhaps an overlay of the SIG 1 or SIG 2 areas, just to show the corridors of greater potential for higher end tornadoes. It really comes down to, I think, your preference and how you like to convey information. I think the main thing is it's there for you, and it's there for you to sort of use as effectively as you want, given your style and what your audience expects from you. So we're interested in learning from you as you explore these new forecasts, how you convey it, what you find to be best practices, because we'd like to share that with others as well. In the end, we all benefit from this progress that we're making as a community.
Yeah. One of the things that I'm a big proponent of is the same colors. If SPC is using green, yellow, orange, red, pink, if they're doing that, we're using the exact same colors. So that's number one. We don't want to create confusion in that. So we match the exact colors. And also, I know that you're taking the now level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the number scale, and kind of adding that to your graphics as well. We've always done that, but we also include the wording. Now, I know you've heard probably many times about slight and enhanced and the wording of those risks, and sometimes that just doesn't resonate with the public. But I think 1 through 5, really does resonate. What was the decision behind the wording behind those risks? I've always wondered that, because you hear slight, a slight chance of precipitation, but we always say a slight risk doesn't mean that a thunderstorm may happen. It's probably you will have thunderstorms. They just might not be as widespread as enhanced risk.
Yeah, your question is a great one, and it goes back to the 70s, actually, the origin of slight, moderate, high. In the original version of the SPC forecast, the language that we used just mirrored the coverage of thunderstorms in general. And then the result was is that it sounded like just the basic thunderstorm forecast. We needed to use different ways to communicate the threat for severe storms. And then this was in a different era when there typically wasn't the sort of social science involvement and documented decision processes. It was just decided to go with the slight, moderate, high. And that's been around now for going on 50 years. So it's, whether it's perfect or not, and I think everyone would agree that there are no five words in the English language that
That's the
mean
truth.
uniformly low to high threat for
Yeah.
everyone.
Yeah.
So hence the colors and numbers. So that's why we did that. But those words, especially slight, moderate, and high, having been around so long, people calibrate to them. And we've had emergency managers, especially, tell us, whatever changes you make, keep moderate and high risk the same, because we know what those mean. And now with 10 years of enhanced risk, they understand those words as well. So we try to make changes that are necessary, but also try to avoid the kinds of radical changes that could really, upset or make it difficult for people to understand our forecast and to interpret them properly.
And so, speaking of interpretation, when this first came out, I was seeing kind of mixed reactions. Um, but, after yesterday's meeting, I think my reaction has definitely leaned towards positive because I'm like, okay, I know your guys' thought process, but I'm wondering from you personally, what are some of the initial reactions you've seen from people from all different kinds of sector in regards to these new changes?
Well, there was certainly a range, you're right. But I think all along, my personal perception was whatever the initial reactions, let people go through the training, let them
Yes.
get more of the details underlying why we did it, the process we went through, and the realization that this is not the end state. This is just the next step in the evolution of how we communicate severe weather threats. And I'll be, just honestly, any negative comments I heard initially seemed to have been allayed once people went through the training, once they had a chance to ask questions and learn more about the process. It's really been quite positive overall, and hopefully that continues. And as we go down this road starting March 3rd, and get into the depths of our season, I think we're all going to learn some things about how to tweak our approach and tweak the forecast so that they are as effective as we can possibly make them.
Okay, so leading to that, so you're saying tweaking. So basically, this is not per se like a full finished final product. If you guys do see flaws with it or how it's being communicated, are there any possibility for changes down the roads in regard to the new outlooks then?
I think the thing that comes to mind first would be changes to our webpage.
Okay.
As we get farther into this process, there may be things we can do to adjust the webpage appearance, and perhaps use of overlays to turn off and on, maybe being able to zoom in and see more details. So I think as we get feedback and as we experience more events, highly, it's a good bet that we're going to see some changes to the way we display it and the kind of functionality that exists on our webpage.
Are you worried about people focusing on just the extreme? Because we know society these days, especially with social media, they're only seeming to be focused on the most extreme weather event, and they're focused on being in that Sig 3 area when really Sig 1 can still bring a significant severe weather. What's your concerns about that?
Well, I don't think it's anything new.
Hmm.
I think that I can't tell you how many times I've heard just in a general audience situation, well, it was just a marginal risk,
Hmm.
but it was a risk for severe storms, and the marginal risk is primarily related to coverage. You can have isolated, very dangerous storms at a marginal risk. Now, normally, as the intensity increases, it's more likely to be in a slight or level 2 risk, or even higher. But we can have significant severe storms in these lower end risks. So there's always been some potential, I think, for people to focus on on that, just like with hurricanes. Oh, it's just a category one. Well, guess what? It's still a hurricane.
Yes.
So yes, there will be some of that, and we'll be mindful, and we're going to continue to do really aggressive outreach and education, as well as sharing information with local National Weather Service Weather Forecast Office to help them in their outreach with their local partners. And hopefully, over time, we can begin to convey to folks what's really important, which is that this is just an incremental. It's a big increment, but it's an increase in our ability to convey the details behind the forecast, and just to help. The goal is to help everyone make more effective decisions. And if we can do that, successfully, then it was worth the effort.
And so you were speaking about, some of the trainings that you guys have been implementing. Yesterday, ours was sort of a broadcast section. I know farther down the line, there's going to be one for those doing digital stuff, which I'm also going to be a part of. But are you guys doing any trainings as well that could be open to the general audience, or are you guys handing that down to some of the forecasting offices to take care of?
It's possible. Yeah, our main focus has been giving the local weather forecast offices the information they need, because they certainly have the local relationships and the ability to reach large audiences within their, uh, it's called county warning areas or CWAs. They're the experts in that sort of communication. We have done talks for professional meteorological organizations, and sometimes that includes enthusiasts, hobbyists, and a wider range of other folks that just have an interest in weather. So I wouldn't rule out that we would do, more publicly focused. That tends to attract really large audiences, and most of our focus is making sure that um, broadcasters, emergency managers, those who are sort of the force multipliers, to use a phrase that's pretty popular. You are you're the experts in how to communicate that to your audiences, and we really want to make sure that you have the understanding and the tools you need to do that well.
Hopefully that gets implemented into our weather graphic system. So, what we'll either way, we made the textures, we can manually draw them on there. We'll make do. But I do want to dive into those SIG 1, SIG 2, SIG 3, because people
Yeah.
listening, watching might be like, what does that exactly mean? So we can bring up that site. You can bring up that table,
Oh,
Leslie,
yeah.
so we can kind of look at it. And Billy, you can talk about the difference between the risk and exactly what that means. So, hey, there's the rain, and we're even under a marginal risk on Saturday.
Yeah,
kind
we
of
are.
clipping our
So,
area.
kind of relevant because that's why we're getting all this information. But yeah, here is the website there with the intensity levels. You can kind of see SIG 1, SIG 2, SIG 3. We know that tornado and wind, they have three different intensity levels, and the hail only has two. But yeah, just kind of
Take us
that.
through
Yeah.
each one of those individual risks, and then also that tornado intensity distribution. I thought that was fascinating in your presentation, and the different slides. Just kind of talk a little bit about that, what people are seeing on the screen.
Sure, it's a bit of there's a lot of information that we've sort of crammed into this one graphic, but what it essentially illustrates is the probability distribution of tornadoes of varying intensity depending on the background environment. And so, and we use something called the significant tornado parameter to help essentially form a composite view of the environment. And then the meteorologist would also use their ability to discriminate between storm type, and that's what would go into these intensity level forecasts. So what this shows is that if you look at the orange and the red, and actually EF5s are so rare they don't really show up as a color. But really, if you just look at, let's go with yellow and higher, that's the probability of the stronger tornadoes, EF2 or greater. And as you get into the orange area, that's EF3 or greater. EF3 or greater tornadoes account for over 85% of tornado fatalities. And so anything that we can do to better predict and convey the likelihood of these stronger tornadoes, the more effective the forecasts become. And what this shows is that for these intensity groups, 1, 2, and 3, the probability of a strong or violent tornado increases significantly as you go from 1 to 2 to 3. And so it doesn't mean that if we're, let's say we have an intensity level 1 forecast, it doesn't mean that EF2 is the greatest intensity tornado that will happen. It just means that the odds are most of them will be in that reasonable maximum range of EF2. And as you go to intensity level 2, then the probability of an EF3 increases and becomes a reasonable sort of upper end on what might occur. And then for intensity level 3, and again, this will be really rare, then you start to look at increasing probabilities, significant probabilities for violent tornadoes, EF4s and higher. So it's just a way to use our understanding of the environments that lead to severe weather and try to quantify that in a way that allows us to have some predictability and provide that in our forecast.
And I know another thing you were talking about how you guys are tied to, the old 5% not having a hatched area until you get to 10%. And this is going to change that and allow that messaging. Like you said, low probability, but high impact. I like to call it low coverage, meaning there could be a storm or two. So high impact, low coverage, meaning not everyone's going to see severe weather. But if that storm moves over your area, that isolated supercell that maybe, affects 1-2% of the population in our weather coverage area, it could be a big deal. And I think that's a big time thing that adding this new probability is really going to help.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you, Dan. It's, I'll just say a long-time forecaster, there have been many days where you knew that conditions were such that if a storm formed, and sometimes that's even a question, forecasting exactly if, when, and where a thunderstorm will form is still a pretty big challenge. But you knew that the environment was such that if it did develop and sustain, it could mean business. It could be a higher end storm, and you have to convey that. This time of the year, if there is a tornado, there's a pretty high probability that it's EF2 or greater, because the cool season is typically a high shear environment. And we know this. And so we will be able to convey that, I think, more effectively. And then as the conditions become even more favorable as we get deeper into the season, we won't just have to stop at significant severe, saying there's some chance for higher end. We can kind of be specific, quantify just how high we think the reasonable upper levels of the intensity spectrum might end up being.
And real quick, I do want to mention too the probability table. I want to go back down to that because we're going to have some people that really love the weather. We've trained a lot of them on social media, on our live streams. I always call it geeking out. Our weather audience essentially loves to geek out. So talk about this new probability. You're seeing 90% for wind. That's something brand new. So talk about maybe the probability table and then some changes that have happened with the new update.
Sure. It is more complicated than it was previously. There's no doubt about that. Having the intensity level 1, 2, and 3, and then the no significant severe area gives us many more options to combine coverage and intensity levels. But the conditional intensity, as we call it, doesn't really consider coverage. It considers the environment and the storm type. And so we won't be hamstrung by the inability to forecast significant severe weather, in low probability situations. Also with wind, the addition of 75 and 90, there are some days each year where you just know that the reports are going to be very many. There's going to be very dense coverage of reports. If you look at a severe weather report map, it'll be so dense with coverage of reports that you won't even be able to tell which states are underneath. And we were limited in the past with 60%, even though the coverage might be much higher. Being able to use 75 and 90 gives us the ability to really point to those days where we have higher confidence that the coverage is just going to be, very, very high end. With hail, we decided, based on verification, to only include intensity levels 1 and 2, really to discriminate. Anything over 3.5 inches is, whether it's 3.5 or 5, that is exceptionally high-end hail that's capable of significant damage. And so there really wasn't the need to discriminate. First of all, the 5-inch or greater would be really rare. So just being able to say 3.5 inch or higher was where we kind of capped off the hail intensity levels. But in any, no matter how you cut that, it's still an ability to discriminate in a much finer resolution than what we've had in the past. So we're excited about these changes.
Another thing I'm noticing is the day 3 does not have a SIG 3, which makes sense. You're 3 days out. There's a lot of uncertainty. I'm sure that
Yes.
would create a social media frenzy
Yep.
if there's a day 3 SIG 3 with a moderate or high risk. So
Yeah,
that's
and we don't allow high risks at day 3. It's
yeah,
just honestly, I think it's beyond the science, as you alluded to.
yeah.
But I think it's possible that the day may come where we could do that with confidence. But we really want to make sure that we're incremental, measured in our outlooks, and that we don't want to cry wolf. If we lose the credibility, then really becomes a challenge to do our job effectively.
Yes, definitely, definitely, to say the least. Well, honestly, thank you guys for like making those changes. I mean, we're excited. We're kind of eager to like kind of work with it at first. It's kind of a big deal when you first hear of this information, but after like we said yesterday's training, we're slowly beginning to gain more confidence and your guys' statistics on top of all this. We were like, okay, you guys actually did some really good background work into this. But
Yeah.
I guess my thing is like, what are the main key points that you want people to take away from both this episode and from the outlook changes and also from SPC's goals?
Yeah, I think the main thing I would say is that as the science advances and we can do more with the information we have, we are trying to close that gap between information that we have here at the SPC and what we can share with everyone who relies on our forecast. I think this is a big step forward in that regard, whether you're a citizen or a weather enthusiast, or you're someone in your shoes with critical responsibilities to keep the public informed. This helps all of us to convey what's expected, how bad it could get, and hopefully as a result of that, everyone makes the right decisions in terms of safety, implementing their own severe weather plans, and ultimately staying safe during the storm season ahead.
You were talking about the timing, Bill. Are you changing the times that the outlooks are issued, or is everything staying the same? 6, 13Z, 16, 30, 20, 1Z?
Yeah, those are staying the same.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, my light detected that I'm not moving, and so
Oh,
it's
that's okay.
turned
Our
off.
We
Yeah,
tried
those
to
are
do
staying
this
the
on
same.
Teams, but we're running out of time. Unfortunately, we had to do it on Zoom just because
Yeah.
the way the audio works. So
Yeah, no
just
problem.
just a
Yeah, that's
work in
all staying the
progress.
same. And yeah, 5 times a day for day 1. So we're going to give you our latest thinking, as frequently as we've been in the past.
Yeah. And then one more question. This is a question that I've had with messaging, and
Mhm.
sometimes it's difficult when you're in between risks. So I'm thinking of a few instances where we had a Cincinnati tornado on December 31st, 2010, which actually was an EF3 and turned out to be one of the deadliest tornadoes in Washington County history. It was in between risks. And sometimes, I don't know, maybe this new messaging and the new risk ideas, because, a lot of people don't realize, and we say it all the time, 7 a.m. to 7 a.m. during daylight saving time, 6 a.m. to 6 a.m. the next day, because that's when 12Z is, when it's noon across the way. But what was the reasoning behind that? And then what do you say we do when sometimes we're not even included in a risk, but it's just because the eastern side of the risk ends and then the western side of the risk begins the next day and we're kind of left out of it?
Yeah, hopefully those are rare because we are increasingly sensitive to those gaps. I think in the end, you have to use the latest information that you have to convey what you think is the likely outcome for your audiences. Our staff, we're going to be focused not only on the outlooks, but mesoscale discussions and watches. And there have been times where we've issued a mesoscale discussion that has said the risk is greater than we had previously anticipated, and that can change sometimes very quickly when it comes to severe storms. We're going to do our best to convey that and hopefully give you the information you need to keep your audiences informed and safe. But yeah, there are times where things do change quickly, and that's one of the reasons we always tell folks as we approach the storm season now that's days or weeks away, you can't monitor the weather forecast often enough.
Mm-hmm.
Stay tuned, have alerting methods that can get your attention, whether it's cell phone, whether radio, or any other way that you rely on weather information. But monitor the forecast routinely because things do change quickly, and we're all going to do our best to keep folks informed. But in the end, if a person doesn't get that information, then it's not as helpful as we wish it could be.
Absolutely. And what was that's amazing advice. So what was the reasoning behind 12Z to 12Z to kind of go in the morning to morning instead of like the 24-hour calendar?
Well, I think, and this goes back to the earliest days in the 50s and 60s of severe weather forecasting. We refer to it as the convective day, the thunderstorm day.
Okay.
There's a diurnal or daytime component to it where storms develop more often than not in the afternoon and evening. They can continue well into the overnight. So at 6 a.m. to 6 a.m. Outlook time frame captured that whole evolution and progress of those storms. If you ended it at midnight, you'd be ending it many times while an event's underway. And so trying to capture the entire evolution of thunderstorms in one day in a 6 a.m. to 6 a.m. time frame seemed to work best.
That's a
That
fantastic
makes a lot
point.
of sense.
I've
Yeah.
never even thought of it that way. So that's incredible. That's more messaging that we can use.
Yes. Thank you so much, Bill, for joining us. I think that's about all the time we have for today's Beyond the Forecast episode. And of course, we'll continue to keep in touch, especially when those changes do get implemented, and let you guys know like how we feel from it from a broadcast standpoint and how our viewers feel about it, because I know you guys need that information from us too. So, like I mentioned, we'll continue to keep in contact. Of course, this is very beginning of a very important change that I'm sure both you and I both needed as broadcasters and, people from the Storm Prediction Centers. So once again, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. And thanks for all you do to be part of the warning system to keep everyone safe.
Of course.
Thank you.